Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. As we have been anticipating for weeks now, yesterday, Wednesday, the European Commission announced that starting in July, it will provisionally add incremental tariffs on top of the current 10% of between 17.4 and 38.1 on Chinese EVs, the first major barrage in what will likely devolve into a full-blown trade war between the PRC and Europe, a conflict which a very vulnerable Beijing has sought to avoid. On top of these duties, the Commission will apply extra individual duties to BYD vehicles, 17.4%, Geely, 20%, and SAIC, 38.1%. China is the bloc's largest trading partner, exporting 10 billion euros of electric cars to the EU in 2023. Unsurprisingly, Germany, Sweden and Hungary have said that they do not approve of the move, fearing Chinese retaliation. EU officials told UK-based The Financial Times that Berlin put pressure on Ursula von der Leyen, who is seeking a second term as Commission President, to drop the anti-subsidy investigation. It is the French that has championed the investigation. Geely owns Volvo of Sweden. The Prime Minister of the Nordic country has joined Scholz and the Hungarian leader Viktor Orban, a friend of Beijing, in opposing the EU tariffs. The three leaders would need to secure at least 12 other governments to overturn the tariffs decision. Member states will vote on them before the 2nd of November. Hours after the European Commission's announcement, German automakers, who are very vulnerable to retaliation from Beijing, including Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz Group, voiced their concerns, with Volkswagen expressing in a statement, quote, "The negative effects of this decision outweigh any potential benefits for the European and especially the German automotive industry," end quote. The European Commission recognises this. Valdis Dombrovskis, EU Trade Commissioner, told media today, quote, "We have no option but to act in the face of soaring imports of heavily subsidised battery electric vehicles. This puts our industry at risk of injury," end quote. The measures come as the EU walks a tightrope in trying to protect the region's car industry with millions of well-paid jobs, while also pursuing a green agenda focused on removing CO2 from transportation. European policymakers are keen to avoid a repeat of what happened with solar panels a decade ago, when the EU took only limited action to curb Chinese imports and many European manufacturers collapsed. Of course, Beijing is deeply unhappy with the move. A spokesperson with the Ministry of Commerce expressed today, quote, "China is deeply concerned and strongly dissatisfied with this development. China's related industries are profoundly disappointed and firmly oppose this," end quote. The spokesperson said that China will take all necessary measures to defend the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises. Following the announcement too, the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU expressed its, quote, "shock, grave disappointment and deep dissatisfaction," end quote. The China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, an industry body, said on Wednesday that the EC's decision is totally unacceptable. While these tariffs will be a painful hit to Chinese EV firms, as we discussed last month, US-based Rhodium Group warned, quote, "But even if the duties come in at the higher end of this range, some Chinese-based producers will still be able to generate comfortable profit margins on the cars they export to Europe because of the substantial cost advantages they enjoy. Duties in the 40 to 50% range, arguably even higher for vertically integrated manufacturers like BYD, would probably be necessary to make the European market unattractive for Chinese EV exporters," end quote. The German-based think tank Kale Institute has estimated an extra 20% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles would reduce imports by a quarter. It calculated that this corresponded to an estimated 125,000 units worth more than $4 billion, with the researchers concluding in the note, quote, "The decline would largely be offset by an increase in production within the EU and a lower volume of EV exports, which would likely mean notably higher prices for end consumers," end quote. Will Roberts, head of automotive research at RHO Motion, said Chinese manufacturers should be able to absorb some of the tariff levies into profit margins. More EU investigations into other sectors are ongoing, and now we wait for Beijing to fire the next shot. Quote, Now we wait for the PRC response. After many signals and threats of retaliation since the investigation was launched, Germany is already against the new tariffs, so penalizing German products seems counterproductive. Targeting French products, and especially ones in sectors that may hurt Macron politically in the upcoming parliamentary election vote, would be an interesting response. The PRC side has to do something after all the threats and condemnations, but they may feel the need for some restraint. End quote. Next up, let's cross the Atlantic, where Washington is further along in its trade competition and technology competition with China. But just quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Subscribing is a big help as well. Just under half of regular viewers are not subscribed to the channel, and this is a good signal for the algorithm. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody. Now we turn to the US, where more restrictions on China are being considered. US-based Bloomberg reports this week that the US is weighing more limits on China's access to chips needed for AI. The measures being discussed would limit China's ability to use a cutting-edge chip architecture known as Gate-All-Around, or GAA. GAA promises to make semiconductors more powerful and is currently being introduced by chip makers. Sources told the outlet that it's unclear when officials will make a final decision, emphasizing that they are still determining the scope of a potential rule. One source said the US goal is to make it harder for China to assemble the sophisticated computing systems needed to build and operate AI models, and to cordon off still nascent technology before it's commercialized. There are also early-stage conversations about limiting exports of high-bandwidth memory chips, some of the people told the outlet. These semiconductors, made by SK Hynix Inc., Micron Technology Inc., and others, speed up access to memory, helping bolster AI accelerators. They are used to train AI software, a process that involves bombarding models with information. It's unclear whether a rule on high-bandwidth memory chips could come together, the people said, emphasizing that the GAA conversation is further along. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, Omar El Olama, the United Arab Emirates Minister for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Economy, believes US concerns about sensitive chip technology moving from the Middle East and into China are justified, expressing in an interview, quote, "Sometimes you are a victim of the neighborhood you live in." End quote. The US has limited chip exports to the Middle East, in part due to concerns that Chinese companies, which are largely cut off from the cutting-edge American technology, could access them through data centers in the Middle East. China has been desperately working to get around export curbs in its race to catch up with the West in chip technology, which Beijing believes will be critical to the next industrial revolution. Japanese financial media outlet Nikkei Asia writes this week that at least 50% of Japan's exports of semiconductor manufacturing equipment went to China for a third straight quarter in the 3 months through March. Quote, amid an apparent surge in demand for less advanced gear spurred by US-led trade restrictions. End quote. Japanese trade data shows China accounting for half of the shipments of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, components for this machinery, as well as gear for making flat panel displays. Along with these restrictions, the US has rolled out more sanctions this week too. Yesterday, Washington announced import bans from 3 Chinese companies over ties to forced labor accusations. The companies include a seafood producer, Shandong Meijia Group, that an investigation by the Outlaw Ocean Project identified as a business employing laborers brought to eastern China from Xinjiang province. Another firm, an aluminum for our North American viewers, processor, and a third, Dongguan Oasis Shoes, brought Uyghurs and other minority persons to factories in Guangdong, according to the official US statement. With these additions, 68 companies now appear on the entity list of firms that the US government says participate in forced labor programs, nearly double the number from the beginning of the year. Meanwhile, also yesterday, the US State Department announced, quote, additional measures to degrade Russia's wartime economy. End quote. The official statement expressed, quote, as G7 leaders prepare to meet in Italy, the United States is today sanctioning more than 300 individuals and entities to degrade Russia's capacity to pursue its war of aggression against Ukraine. In this action, the Department of State is imposing sanctions on more than 100 individuals and entities. End quote. 7 PRC firms made the list, including defense state-owned enterprise Poly Technologies. In a separate statement, the United States Department of State expressed, quote, concern by the scale and breadth of exports from the People's Republic of China that supply Russia's military-industrial base. The department is designating PRC companies providing Russia with a wide range of dual-use goods that fill critical gaps in Russia's defense production cycle. End quote. Separately, the Commerce Department said that it was targeting shell companies in Hong Kong for diverting semiconductors to Russia, taking steps that would affect nearly $100 million of high-priority items for Moscow, including such chips. In a draft statement for the upcoming G7 meeting, the group is also preparing to call on China to stop supporting Russia. Once again, the draft statement, which could still change before it's agreed by leaders at the summit in Italy due to start today, expressed, quote, China's ongoing support for Russia's defense industrial base has significant and broad-based security implications, end quote. Trade also appears to be on the agenda, with the statement expressing that China's policies, quote, are creating global spillovers, market distortions, and harmful overcapacity in a range of sectors. We are not trying to harm China or thwart its economic development. Indeed, a growing China that plays by international rules would be of global interest, end quote. Thus, as we can see from today's update and what we have covered in previous weeks, in both trade and security, the US and Europe, half of the world's economic might, are increasingly aligned in their policy and strategy toward China. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.